Father, once again, we thank you for life and all the blessings that life brings. Every day, Lord, may we use all of our gifts and our talents to be a blessing to the people in our sphere of influence, our families, our friends, our community, our church, wherever we find ourselves. May the fruit of your Spirit be seen in our lives, and may people recognize us as ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven. As we walk through this earth, as we journey and we come in contact with people, may the flag of heaven be planted wherever we are, and may your kingdom grow. Lord, thank you for the promise in Revelation that if we read, if we hear, if we understand, if we keep the words of the book, that we will be blessed. As we read through Revelation once again, we pray that that blessing may be applied to our lives this morning. And Father, we want to see your face. We want your name written on our forehead. And we pray that as we spend time with you, that will one day become a reality. So we can't wait till we see you. Until that day, watch over us, be with our families and our friends. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, God bless you. I forgot to even pray for you, Pastor Robbie, but you'll be right.
I'll be fine.
All right, good.
Blessings. Thank you very much. I was talking to my wife last night, and Aris is sharing all the different gifts that he keeps getting given every single day, and she said, it sounds like you have taken Aris to the grandparent heaven. So thank you very much for lavishing your gifts onto Aris. It's made his time here very enjoyable. All right, well, we're going to continue on where we left off yesterday, but before I do, I want to put a footnote for today's topic, because I hope that by now you see that the purpose of prophecy is to get our attention and show us that God has his signature on the book, which we call the Bible, right? And the overarching goal of what we've seen in the Revelation is that Jesus wants us to know that his end game is for us to see him face to face, right? Is that clear so far? Because that's super important that you understand that before we look at today's topic. In my journey as a Seventh-day Adventist, I have found that we as a people generally are very interested in last day events. And we're very interested in being up to date on what the latest thing is happening in the world and all the different organizations and individuals and things like that. And that's good, but it also can be very dangerous. It can be dangerous from the perspective that that's what we get obsessed about, we focus on that, and the reality is that sometimes it doesn't play out the way we think it's going to play out or the way someone's told us it's going to play out. And then when it doesn't happen, it discourages us. And Jesus told us the whole purpose of him giving us the future, telling us things before it happens, was so that when it happens, what does it do? It strengthens our faith. So I'm very cautious on sharing things in the context of prophecy that's very specific, because what we don't want to do is create the sensationalist sort of attitude towards what's happening in the world. Do you know what I mean by that? So, but it's important. Jesus tells us to watch, pray and those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, I want you not to forget the whole purpose of Revelation is the real story is God's trying to get us through Jesus from where we are in our relationship with him to a better relationship with him. That's the purpose of Revelation, all right? But I showed you yesterday that at the center of the book of Revelation, that chiastic structure is the focus of the cosmic conflict between good and evil. And at the center of that is the kingdom. The kingdom is under attack. God's kingdom is under attack. And Satan set up his own kingdom, and we're basically in his kingdom, and God's calling us to join his kingdom. So there is obviously a battle being fought out in all different spheres and different levels. Now, in Revelation yesterday, we looked at chapter 12, 13, and we looked at 14 as a package. Remember that from yesterday? In fact, anyway, I'll just go to the next slide. Here we go. So we looked at this yesterday. And we saw that chapter 12 articulates that there is a great battle between God's kingdom and Lucifer's attempt to replace that kingdom. And we sort of tracked it from about here in verse 7 all the way down to verse 17, where we're left with the picture that the dragon is so furious. His battle that started in heaven got kicked out of heaven, and now he's down here, and he has just been furious with the ambassadors of Jesus all the way through human history, down through the Dark Ages, down through to the New World. And then in verse 17, he's got his last stand against the remnant. Then we looked at chapter 13, and this is God going, I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit on how he is going to try and wage this war. We know it's against people who are ambassadors for Jesus because they keep the commandments of the kingdom of God and they have the faith of Jesus. And we're going to unpack what those two things mean tomorrow night if you're here on Friday. So in chapter 13, Satan's attack is going to be, I'm going to launch a sea beast or raise up a sea beast, which is a system that's going to counterfeit the way for salvation. That's the goal of that one. And this one's going to force everyone to go along with that one. And then finally, if you don't, this is the consequences. And that's what we finished on yesterday. Now, one of the things that I have noticed as I've journeyed through Bible prophecy over the last 15 to 17 years or so is that more and more people are looking, not so much since COVID, probably before COVID was more than this, but before COVID, let's just say that, people were saying within the church, Seventh-day Adventists were saying to me when I would teach prophecy, do you really believe that what Revelation 13 is describing, especially from here to here, do you really believe that's even possible? And I've been quite surprised with the amount of people that think that. And I understand it, but I'm surprised by that. Because one of the things that people say to me is, and probably looking at some of you, you could say the same thing. I've waited for Jesus to return my entire life. And I've been told for my entire life that there's going to be this church religion, a church power, then a state power, and the coming together of that and forcing worship. I've heard that my entire life, and I haven't seen any of it. And not just that, but my grandparents, and then my grandparents above their grandparents, and you can trace it all the way back, right? I'm sure that's some of your stories. You've heard from little kids growing up, if you grew up in the church, that someday it's all going to go down, and your parents probably taught that, and their parents believe that, and their parents believe that, and it goes back quite a few generations. And so the question is, me who came into knowledge of God as an adult and came into this understanding of prophecy, do I really believe it? Because you didn't really have a choice. You were indoctrinated with it as a child, and your parents were children, like generational Adventists. You've been indoctrinated. So how can I believe this stuff that you've been indoctrinated with from someone that's come from outside in? So what I want to share in this session, which will be a bit shorter than yesterday because I've got to go earlier today, is I want to share with you why I believe that this is actually going to happen. Well, this has happened, this is happening, and this is about to happen. I'm going to share why I believe that from the perspective of prophecy, as we've looked at a little bit, but then also what's actually happening. Okay, so that's what today is going to do. But remember, I'm sharing this after I've told you the purpose of prophecy. Remember that? So don't leave here being obsessed with the sensationalism of what's happening in the world. Leave here going, well, everything we've been told about prophecy being God's signature and to give us hope and to give us focus is all actually true because what we're seeing happen around us, okay? And then tomorrow, when in our last session, we're going to unpack this chapter 14. So, does that make sense? That was the footnote to what I want to share now. So I want to take you back to the year 1999. I was in my early 20s, and I was, as I told you already, I wasn't a Christian, and I had just built a brand new house. I was 21, and I was driving my second brand new car. I was doing very, very well financially because I was working in the dot-com. It was about to burst, but it was a bubble at that time. And at that, in 1999, I was earning more than my mum and my dad's salaries combined. And my dad was a sales manager, my mum was a nurse. And I was 21 and I was earning more than both of them combined. So life was good is my point, right? So I decided with my best mate at the time, who I'd been through school and primary school, high school and college, we decided we were going to do a 6-week tour around Europe. We're going to backpack around Europe. And so we went to the travel agent and we said, because back then you booked tickets through travel agents, and we said, we want to go overseas, and where we want to go is we want to go to all these places in 6 weeks. We're going to backpack around. And so we had many, many meetings with our travel agent, and the girl there, she booked our flights. We're flying into Frankfurt, and then we're going to go by Euro Rail and Euro Bus. Back then it was available, and we're going to all these locations, zigzagging across Europe, doing overnighters on buses and backpacking, and it was going to be the most amazing thing we'd ever done. Well, we booked everything up, and it was about 8 months before we were supposed to leave. We started booking all this, and she says, "Have you guys got your traveller's checks?" And I'm like, "What's a traveller's check?" You've probably used traveller's checks, I'm guessing, right? I've done this presentation with some people. There's a face that doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about because it's not a thing anymore. What a traveller's check basically was a piece of paper that you'd go to your bank in Australia, you give them your Australian dollars, and they give you a piece of paper that represented an amount of US dollars, and it was blank. So it had no name, who we'd be paying to, and that sort of thing. And the idea is when you go overseas and you go, say you have a dinner in a restaurant, because back then there was all these different currencies, so you'd pull out your paper, because everyone loved American dollars back then, and you would write out the amount, or whatever it was that you were going to pay, and then you give them this check, and then they would give you the change in local currency. So it's basically a way to use US dollars as a single sort of currency as you travel around. Because in Europe, in 1999, every single country had its own currency. And it was really, it was exciting, but it was also an economic nightmare if you were traveling, if you guys traveled back then. Because every time you went to a different country, you had to go to find an exchanger, you'd give them your currency, they would exchange in that currency, and you'd always lose some money in the transfers. It wasn't ideal, right? But that's how it worked. So we went to the bank. I was banking with National Australia back then, and I gave them, I think it was about $2,000 of US checks is what I got out of it, right? So I was ready to go overseas. So we had probably about 6 or 7 months left before we were about to go. I had my backpack all bought and packed, and I had everything I needed, the traveller's checks, the whole deal. But then I get a letter in the mail about 2 months before I'm going to leave, and it's from National Australia Bank. And they go, "Congratulations, Mr. Bergan, you've got a new key card," we used to call them back then. We call them debit cards or credit cards now, but it was this sort of card, and it was basically, your savings account, right? And they say, "Congratulations, we just want to announce to you that we're issuing you with a new card, and you'll notice on this card, it's got this thing called a plus logo on it. And the amazing thing with this is that now you can use your Australian card in any ATM in the world where you see the plus logo. So now you don't need traveller's checks and you don't need a credit card. You just put your ATM card into any of these slots anywhere in the world, put your Australian PIN number in, and you can get an account balance and you can withdraw local currency from your Australian account in real time." Because what had happened in 1999, the internet had exploded in the 1994, 95, 96, and by 1999, the banking systems had started connecting all of the different countries together so that they could do real-time bank inquiries and transfers and password validations and account balances and things like that. So when I went to Europe, every single country I went to, I'd go straight to the ATM, put my Australian card in, put my PIN number in, and get an account balance. And I was a millionaire in Italy because it was lira, and it was like this exponential amount. And then I'd go to France and get francs, and I'd go to Spain and get pesos or Deutschmarks up in Germany. And then I'd go to England and I would be so poor because it was Great Britain pounds and the exchange rate was shocking, still is. So something changed in the 1990s with the advent of technology and the internet. Things started to connect. And it was great. I went to Europe. I didn't even use any of the traveller's checks. I came back and cashed them all back into the bank because I used my ATM card. It was fantastic. And I can remember thinking in 1999, now I wasn't religious at all, but I remember thinking, man, how amazing is humanity? We're evolving at such an exponential rate because we've got all this access to technology now. We're interconnected. Like, we're just achieving massive amounts of interconnectedness. Now, in the 1990s, there's a famous, or he's famous now, Thomas Friedman's his name, and in the 1990s he was a political commentator. He's worked with Bill Clinton's administration, with George Bush's administration, as in the senior Bush, and he's basically a Middle East advisor. He was a correspondent to the White House, all sorts of things. So he's a pretty switched on individual. He decided to write a book in the 1990s called The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And it's basically his observation on this thing that he called globalization. Because in the 1990s, in the book he talks about how that he was in Japan, and Japan was racing ahead with these super modern cars called the Lexus. But then he went on another plane on the same week to Israel, and here's a bunch of old farmers still doing olive trees the way it's been done for like the last 4,000 years. And he was saying there's something happening in the world because we're getting this globally connected world. But anyway, it's a very interesting read. So he wrote this book in the 1990s, and in the book, he makes some observations. Now, he's not religious, and it's not a religious book, but he made some observations. He said, looking at what's happening in the world in the 1990s, he said, I think there are three things that are happening that if they continue to happen, we are going to end up what he called a global village. Today we would say globalization. But global village in his mind is that everyone is going to be connected to each other through different forms and things. So in his book, to summarize it, there are three things that he considers to be driving factors for heading to a global village. The first one is, he says, if we continue with democratizing technology, which basically is a fancy way of saying, if technology becomes more and more accessible. Now, in the 1990s, my grandfather gave me his old computer. It was an Apple IIe. And he had it for 6 years. So he bought it in the 1980s. In the 1980s, he paid $15,000 for that computer, right? 6 years later, in the 1990s, he bought another computer because he had a business here in Sydney. And that computer that he bought to replace it was $5,000. So in the space of just a few years, the price of the technology dropped and the technology got exponentially smarter and faster. And so by the time he gets to the 1990s when he writes the book, the middle of the 90s, we had Windows 95 come out, which sort of revolutionized the usable aspects of computing. Before that was a sort of DOS, and no one knew what they were doing, so it was hard to get the everyday person interested. But then 95 came out, and it was pictures, and you could use a mouse and drag things, and so people were like, wow, what's this? And then the internet came along publicly, sort of thing. And so people were getting excited. And so by the end of the 1990s, Thomas Friedman says, if we continue on this trajectory where technology is getting more and more and more available, he thinks it will end up connecting us all. Now, 1990s. He couldn't have imagined, I guess, what we're experiencing now in 2023, so, 30 years later. So he says, this is number one. This is the number one thing. Number two is the democratization of finances. And he means by this, he's like, by the middle to late 1990s, getting access to debt was getting easier. If you go back a few years, and some of you probably know this better than I can tell you, in the 70s, when my parents bought a house, they told me that they had to take their bank manager to lunch to explain to them why they're such good candidates to get debt, like to get a loan from the bank. That was in Sydney. Because you had to have a relationship, like you had to know the people to get sort of money and things like that. But then as you got through to the 80s into the 90s, credit cards like bank card came out, and then other forms of getting debt, personal debt, started to increase. Visa became a big thing, MasterCard became a big thing. And by the time you get to the 90s, other avenues started coming on the scene, like PayPal, which is an online way of transferring money around. And so he makes this observation in the 1990s, if more people can access money, what they're going to do with their money is buy technology. You see the connection? And if you have the connection, you have the technology, we'll have the connection together. So he's like, the technology is getting more accessible, it's getting cheaper for more powerful, and people are getting more access to money easier, so you didn't even have to save the money now, you can get the money to buy the technology. So that's the second factor. The third factor is information, the access to information. In the 1980s and 90s when I was in school, when you wanted to do an assignment on rockets, you'd have to go to the library and meet the little old lady, no offense to anyone here, little old lady who was very grumpy because she had 15, 20 school kids every half hour coming through to her desk saying, "Where do I find the rocket books?" And so she'd turn around a big old wheelie chair and she'd pull out that great big whopping long drawer. Remember what I was talking about? It's like a drawer about that wide, and it was long. They pull it out, and it's full of what? Little cards, all alphabetically organized. And she was Google. That was Google. Actually, maybe more like Siri today. But you'd say, "Hey, how do I find a book on rockets?" So she'd turn around, pull out the big old manual Google, and she'd be going through all the results, and she'd find the R and pull out, okay, go to section 5, aisle 3, category whatever, and you're on a big adventure trying to find your book on rockets. And that's how you got information. Or you would wait till your dad bought the Sunday paper, and then you'd go, after he spent 2 hours reading the thing, you'd go through and find out what's happening in the world. That's how we got information. But he said, with the advent of technology getting faster and more connected, and people having money to buy it, we're going to get information much faster. And the information is going to connect us. Think about this today. 30 years later, this morning I get notified every morning what's happening in the news overnight. And I literally know what's happened in Syria, in Israel, in Japan. It doesn't matter. I know what's happening. So do you. And if something happened like in the next 5 minutes, say an earthquake happened in Peru, we would know within 5 minutes. Not even that. I mean, if you're watching your phones, not listening to me, you'd know straight away. Because we get notifications in real time now. Think about the 1990s. The best way you get real-time information was watching satellite TV. And then you're relying on a news network to tell you. So he concludes in his book, he says, if these three things happen, if they keep developing from the 1990s, we get more technology, we get more access to get money to buy technology, and more access to information, we will end up being completely universally connected. That's his point. Now, he goes on in the book and he says, now, if that happens, and I suspect it will, this is what he says, I have two great fears for the world that's globally connected. Here's his two fears. 1990s he wrote this. And again, not religious. He said, the first fear I have is if this all happens, there'll be an opportunity for global economic control. Because if all of our finances are globally connected, then someone or something or some group can control it. That was his first fear. The second fear in his book, he basically could see the possibility of the GFC thing happening and all that. So the second fear was possibility of global economic collapse. These are the two fears. So he says if we keep on this trajectory, we're all getting technology, we're all getting funds to buy it, and we're all getting information to connect, we're going to end up with the possibility of economic control and economic collapse. So this is what he sort of foresaw back in the 1990s. Now, it was less than 10 years later that the GFC hit. You remember that thing? It didn't really bother most of you. Actually, if you had a super fund, you probably would have felt it. But it really didn't impact Australians too much. It was more overseas. Like I was living in Asia at the time, and in Asia it hit hard. In the US, it hit even harder. But then, if I skip this one, then if you just go another 10 years later than that, or a bit more than 10 years, you end up, this is when COVID hit in 2020, the Australian Stock Exchange lost 24% in the first quarter of 2020, just like that. Why? Because we're all globally connected now. What affects one country affects all countries these days. In fact, the economists said during the GFC, they said America sneezed economically and the whole world caught the cold. That's the sort of world that we're living in. So when we're talking about, now why do I share that? I share that because thinking people, not religious people, they can just look at what's happening in the world and the development of the world and trajectory of the world, and they can make some really educated conclusions. What's fascinating is that when you look at what the Bible has been teaching for nearly 2,000 years in the case of the New Testament, there's a strange convergence taking place, and that's what I want to talk about briefly. So in prophecy, most people want to know, is there economic prophecy? Is there some way I know how to keep my assets safe or grow my assets when everyone's losing everything? What can I do? Well, the short answer is pay your tithe. That's the best way. You be faithful to God, God will be faithful to you. That's the easiest way. But when we think of economic prophecy, people start having pictures of things like, oh, they're going to implant us with these RFID chips, these little, like the size of a grain of rice, and get implanted in our bodies, and that's how they're going to try and control us and these sorts of things. Now, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know. I know it's already happening. There's parts of the world where this has already happened, not like in terms of religion, but there's many companies in Sweden who their employees have these already inserted. It's a 30-second procedure. They insert it basically right here, and then they use it as access cards to buildings for their employer. And you go to the cafeteria, does the payment for your thing. It's already happening. That part's happening. Is it connected to the mark of the beast? Probably not. But that's what people think of when they think of the Bible and economics, right? Other people, probably more because of Hollywood, they think of this sort of stuff, getting tattooed on your head with a barcode. I remember in the 1980s, I think it was 86, we had a little food town or something. It was this is before Woolies took over and Coles took over. There was a little grocery store that we'd go to. And up until 1986, you'd go there and there would be a young lady there who would have this till that you'd be punching in all the numbers. Like you have to punch in the price for everything. And all the prices were written with little black texters. You remember all the tins? All the tins had little black texter, a dollar or 50 cents or whatever the prices were. And she'd be there punching it all in and be like this big paper coming out in real time, and you'd pay. Well, one day we showed up to the same little shop in the same little town, 1986, and they had a barcode scanner. And half of the people in town refused to buy anything because they were worried that somehow, and they weren't even religious, but they were worried that somehow the government was going to track them because they bought a tin of baked beans with a barcode on it. Because no one understood the technology, right? Now we don't even think about it. That's how we encode information, the price of the product, all that sort of stuff. So some people think that the Bible talks about barcodes on their heads. Hollywood movies come out about the mark of the beast, and somehow the beast is going to tattoo us all on the foreheads or stick things under our hands. And they get that imagery from our favorite book of Revelation. So we're going to just have a quick little overview of Revelation again. We've said already that Revelation sort of covers this period of time, 96 AD, all the way down to what we call the end of time. And within this book, it's basically, as we've already said, it's articulating the struggle between good and evil, right? I mean, at the core, it's the two kingdoms. And what God's overarching theme to us is he wants us to be in his kingdom. And he's done everything he could do for that to happen. And the last thing in Revelation is he's going to take a message to the whole world to say, this is it. This is your last chance. Not because I don't want you to be saved, but because the enemy is making his last wage on you. So come on, side with me and join my kingdom. But of all of those, that overarching theme, there are subplots. And one of those subplots is economics, as we'll see in just a second. And it's not, from a good perspective, it's normally from a bad perspective. If we look at Revelation's 22 chapters, these are the sections that sort of allude to elements of economic aspects to prophecy. But it's only a sub-story. It's not the main story. And I think sometimes as people who are interested in Bible and Bible prophecy, we get obsessed with the minor stories and we make that the major story. So what I'm sharing with you today is a minor story in prophecy, all right? It's not the major story. But it's significant to understand that the minor stories are being almost laid out before us to show us that if all the minor stories are about to be fulfilled, then the major story gets fulfilled by default. Does that make sense? If you fulfill all the chapters in the story, then you finish the book at some point, right? If you're not finishing the chapters, then how are you going to finish the book? So that's kind of the angle that I'm looking at it. So as I've said before, in Revelation, we've got three main characters. I call these guys the Dark Trinity. This is the dragon. The dragon at the top level we said yesterday was who? Satan himself. And then he's got his puppets, right? He's got Rome, as in pagan Rome was a puppet when he tried to kill baby Jesus. He's also a puppet when he comes through the Dark Ages and so on. But anyway, so that's behind the scenes. The dragon is the architect to the story. Remember the war plan of chapter 13? The dragon's the architect to it. Then we've got the sea beast. The sea beast is the puppet. No one's going to worship the dragon, right? No one's going to go, hey, devil, I want to worship you. Some people do, but most people don't. So the way he achieves it according to Revelation is he does it through his puppet. We all look at the puppet and he looks a lot better than this picture illustrates it. And we go, wow, we're on board with this, because the Bible says the whole world marvels and wonders after this puppet. But by doing that, the Bible says that they're actually worshipping the dragon, right? So this is the front man. This is the puppet for the architect. And then down here, as I said yesterday, we've got the hired help. This is the muscle. This is the muscle to get everyone universally on board with the plan so that the end goal is achieved. Does that make sense? So that's the big picture. The dragon, we've talked about him. This is what it says in Revelation. It says the dragon gave power. So he's the architect. He's the one that has the power. He's the one that has the authority. He's the one that has the throne. He's the one that can pass it on. So he's the architect. And then when we look at the sea beast, as we've already said, the sea beast, it says, all the world marveled and followed the beast, and they worship, that's the world, worship the beast. So he's the one receiving the accolades. He's the front man. And then it says, all authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Now remember, yesterday we said that that's the same group of people that those three angels are going to. So we have a competition for the same people, which is planet Earth. Two kingdoms trying to persuade the same people to cast their vote. So now we come to the land beast, which is that second power in Revelation 13. And this is what it says about him, as we saw yesterday. He comes up out of the earth, and then he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he causes. That's the idea of forcing the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, which is that front man, that puppet. And then it says, and he causes all, both small and great. So remember it said before, as a big blanket statement, he's going to cause or to force the whole world to get in line, right? That's the last verse. Now it tells us how he's going to force. He causes all, both small and great, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. And then it continues on and says that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, we're going to focus, the next probably 15 minutes is going to be focusing in on that one concept in this one verse. So is this one verse the whole message? No, it's not. The whole message is that we've got a great controversy between good and evil, two kingdoms at war. God's calling us to sit in his kingdom on his throne, face to face with him. And he's using just this one little verse to show one little element of how the enemy is going to try and play the game. Does Does that make sense? But I'm going to use this one little verse, this one little point, to illustrate why I believe that this stuff is actually going to happen. Versus some people who sit around going, well, that was what the church used to believe and what they used to teach. The world's progressed, the world's moved on. Don't fall for that logic. Let's have a look at this. In this verse, we're looking at the main mechanism, according to Revelation 13, of how the second beast is going to force. This is an element of that force. And this is what it says, as I just read. It says, no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark of the name, blah, 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 blah. I want you to look at it this way. In that act, the Bible is telling us, it says the second beast is going to force the world to worship. And this is how he's going to force. It's going to force that no one may buy or what? Except they have the mark or the name or the number. So I want you just to look at this. This is really interesting, at least to me. Maybe not to you. Don't get freaked out. It's super safe. Don't worry. Jesus is in control. And he's told us these things before they happen so that when we see them happening, we will be comforted because of the fact that he told us. So in this verse, there are three characteristics of how the force is supposed to happen. No one may buy or sell except three characteristics. Now, what's fascinating is, and this is kind of, programmer looking at problems at different directions. When I saw this, there are three different ways to explain that. There's a different way to explain each of those three things, or to have a synonym almost. A synonym for the word no one, now this might do your head in at first, but bear with me. A synonym for no one in this passage, meaning a similar way to describe the same thing, is with the word, if I can click it, is global. Because what's the verse implying? No one is going to be unaffected by this, which actually means it affects who? Everyone. So this, number one, is a global issue. Does that make sense? Because it affects everyone. No one can escape this, so it's global. The second one, buy or sell, that can be summarized with the word economic. Buying and selling is an economic thing, right? So now we've got no one's going to escape this, so it's global. Buying and selling is economic, so it's global economics. And the last one there says except. Now this one's going to do your head in at first, but trust me, it's sound. A synonym for the word except is the idea of control. Why? Because basically what it says is, you can't do this except you meet this criteria. Or you can do this because you meet this criteria. What is that describing? It's describing control, right? So in this one verse, and this is one little sub-story of the whole big story of the great controversy, God chooses to tell us that the way that this second beast is going to use its authority and its power and its might to get the world on par with that puppet is through global economic control. That's the elements that exist in this verse, which is fascinating because that's the very first fear that Thomas Friedman had. Remember the book I just told you, Alexis and the Olive Tree? He says if we have access to technology, access to money, and access to information, we will end up being a globally connected village, the whole planet. And if that happens, my first fear is that we could arrive in a situation where we have global economic control. Surprise! Revelation talked about this since 96 AD. And people have been saying, well, that can't ever happen. Well, 30 years ago, Thomas Friedman thought it was very possible, not from a religious perspective, but just from a fact of mechanics. If you have all the ingredients working together, then the logical conclusion is this could possibly happen. So Revelation paints this picture that we are looking down the barrel of global economic control as a mechanism to achieve the religious agenda. Does that make sense? So, in order to achieve global economic control, press the wrong button. To achieve this, now let me say this. In 96 AD, when John wrote this out, If I was being persecuted by the Romans and I had the means to do so, I could get myself on a boat, I could get myself with some camels or whatever, donkeys, whatever it is, and I could get myself to China. I could get myself to Ethiopia, down to India. I could get away from Rome. And can they then sanction me with global economic control? No, I'd be dealing with some other currency, with some other trade, some other bartering system. So in 96 AD, the prospects of having global economic control seemed pretty far-fetched. During the Dark Ages even, during World War II even, during the War on Terror, possibly, the US started sanctioning and shutting down bank accounts for supposed terrorists in the year 2002, 2003. So in order to have global economic control, there's two things that you need in order for that to happen. Number one is you need to have a global financial system. Because how do you control someone in Pakistan from Australia if you're not globally connected to Pakistan? Does that make sense? How do you control someone in Fiji from Canada if you're not globally connected? So the first ingredient for this to happen, there has to be a global financial system. That's the first thing. The second thing you need, oh, by the way, we have that. 1999, that's when that came online. Okay, so we have that. The second thing you need, though, now is a controllable currency system. See, for the last 30 years, since we've had this has gone live, we haven't had the control part. We've had global economy, though, because we've had that. But we haven't had the control because even though we have global financial system, it's still limited to me withdrawing my fiat currency, which is dollars and cents. If I have all of my money out of the bank account systems, which are a global financial system, then I can still operate without any fear of being controlled, right? Because if let's say all my bank got shut down or whatever else, if I've got all the money under my mattress, I can go to you and say, hey, can I buy some tomatoes from you? Say, yeah, sure. So I give you some cash and you give me tomatoes. I'm not controlled economically. So as long as or I can use gold, or I could use silver, or I could use whatever, right? So in order to get to the control part, this system needs to have a currency that's controllable. And in all of human history, that has been impossible. Totally impossible. You can't control gold because you can go dig it up yourself. You can get the gold, you can move the gold. The gold's not attached to anybody. It's whoever's got it in their pocket's got the gold. With the fiat, which is supposed to represent gold or silver and the imaginary God that we trust in, we just have something that we say this is tangible, and if I've got it, you can't control it. So this is where people have said to me over the last almost 20 years, do you really believe that there'll be global economic control as it's depicted in the book of Revelation? When it's impossible, like it's never been possible in human history to have global control of people's money. It's been impossible. So, some people say, oh, my grandparents believed that Jesus was going to come in 1950s and their parents believed in the 1840s and whatever it is. I don't think God's limited to this stuff, but the way it's written, you kind of need a few things in place for it to be fulfilled. You know what I mean by that? So the question now is, if that's already happened and that's the goal, what's the story with this? Well, this is where it gets super interesting. And remember, I'm sharing this with you today as just a snippet of a little sub-story of the overarching story of Revelation, for the purpose of showing you, I believe that Revelation has it right. And what it's saying will happen. It hasn't happened today, but it's on its way, right? So let's have a look at this real quick in the next few minutes. So global financial system, I shared with you already, 1999, that came into existence. Now let's explore a controllable currency system. Basically, what, in my mind, and this is the part that I want you to be very cautious about. I don't want you to leave here going, this is the only way it's going to fulfill, because I don't necessarily believe that. What I'm going to share with you now, because over the years you've heard things like, oh, cashless society is the way we're all going, and that may be it. To be honest, that may be it. But don't put all your focus on one thing, because that's not what the Bible is telling us to do. It's giving us a big picture, and it's just saying, big picture, they're going to control you economically, globally. It's not telling us how. It's just saying it's going to happen. And then it moves on in the story. And all that's supposed to do is go, well, I shouldn't be surprised if it comes. And actually, when it does happen, wow, my faith is even stronger in Jesus because he told me before it would happen. What the danger is, and this I've seen this time and time again in the last 20 years, I'm sure you guys have as well, is that people get fixated on the next thing. It's May 27, the Pope's going to the UN, and they're going to talk climate change, and the Sunday law's coming in. Like this sort of stuff, this is not helpful for anyone. If it happens, it will happen. But it's not helpful to be living on moment by moment by moment by moment, right? So what I'm going to share with you now, don't get hung up on it. I'm just showing you just some things that seem to indicate that Revelation knew what it was talking about when Jesus gave it to us. Oh, the other thing is, as an example, I've been studying prophecy, like I said, for about 20 years, and I know lots of other people are as well, and nobody, I don't care what they tell you, nobody was predicting COVID-19 type thing happening. As in, what I mean by that is, not the thing happening, but the health avenue of the crisis. I don't know a single Adventist preacher or evangelist that was talking before COVID hit that health will be the measure that's going to galvanize the whole planet. No one was imagining that. We all thought it would be religious, at worst, environmental. But then out of nowhere, health became the thing that bonded everyone together and split everybody up and caused all the... So what I'm saying is, don't get fixated on what you think is going to happen. Stay safe and look at the big picture. Big picture, global economic control, for the purpose of getting everyone in line with the worship issue. Having said all that, let's have a look very quickly at this history of the desire of the world to have a controllable currency. This is a desire of banks and governments around the world. This is 100% their desire. Let's have a look. Back in 2018, and everything I'm going to share with you in the next couple of slides comes from Sydney Morning Herald, it comes from the ABC News, it comes from the Washington Post, Forbes magazine. These are all what are considered mainstream media, okay? I'm not sharing with you anything from anyone that's not mainstream, because I'm not trying to create a story here. I'm just sharing with you what they're telling us in mainstream media and how it seems to be aligning up. Like Thomas Friedman said, we're moving directly to a place where there'll be economic control, global economic control. So this is an article back in 2018, right? So this is all pre-COVID. This article talks about the cashless future is here. Now, why cashless? Because if you don't have a physical thing to represent your money, then it's controllable, because now it's digital. Digital equals control. Non-digital equals no control. So the desire of all the planet and all the countries around the world is to get to digital, okay? This was back in 2018. It says the cashless future is here, with coins and banknotes becoming what? Niche. That means it's like just a little segment of the society. And it's funny because it goes on and talks about church donations. This is 2018. If you read the whole article, it talks about how church donations are dropping because people aren't bringing cash to church. And you know what's really funny? I was at church 3 weeks ago, at a church here in Australia, and they were passing an EFTPOS terminal around. Instead of, so you could tap your donation, your tithe and offerings in. I've never seen it anywhere else in Australia, but it was the first church anyway. It was pretty cool. So anyway, let's continue on very quickly here. This is 2018 still. It says Australia's path to a cashless society is accelerating and what? Inevitable. This is 2018. We're going this direction, whether you want it or not. That's where we're going. Then again, 2018, ABC reported, regulators are pushing us into a cashless world as the Reserve Bank of Australia declares, this is what they said, a turning point has been reached. 2018, the Reserve Bank announced this. Now, the governor just got the sack, basically, last week, just gone, and they're putting in a new governor. But his whole goal in his last 7 years was to get Australia to the point where we can be where we can operate as a cashless society. That's been his goal, Philip Lowe. And so you read through all this, and it basically looks like a turning point's been reached. We're now easier and more convenient for us to get rid of banknotes. And at some point coming is because of what he had published on the Reserve Bank of Australia's website. So again, I'm not sharing with you conspiracies here. I'm just sharing with you what they're telling us. So in 2018, this is Philip Lowe, who just got replaced last week. He goes, a journey towards a near cashless payment system. And basically what happened in 2018, they launched the NPP, the new payment platform, and it was going to be finished, and it was finished in 2020. So it was a 2-year rollout. This now has replaced the FPOS network. You know, the FPOS network that we've all used for the last 20, 30 years? That system has been replaced. None of the terminals look different, it all looks the same, but the backbone infrastructure was switched over to this in 2020. And that's what he's talking about. There's redesigned this backbone because now it's all centered around the Reserve Bank of Australia and not just individual banks talking to each other through the internet. So they became like the broker backbone between the FPOS system. So what that allows now is for transactions to happen that don't need settlement. So in the current, or the old world, before 2020, if you've got money with Westpac and you've got money in Commonwealth and you want to pay, then they've got to do these electronic journal reconciliations, and then they take money from that bank and they physically take it to this bank. What this system's doing is the money sits with the Reserve Bank and it just gets updated in a database that it was there, now it's there, but it didn't move because it's digital. And so this system has made that now completely possible. And that's what he's talking about. So then we read in 2019, the rise of cashless society sees coins sales plummet for the Royal Australian Mint. Basically, coins dropped by 30%. So they're like, hey, no one's buying our coins anymore. No one's needing our coins because we don't need so much more in circulation because people are just going with the tap and go cashless transactions. So then we hit, this is February 2020. This is not related to COVID. This is just because COVID didn't really affect us till the beginning of March. But in this article, it says the business appeal of tap and go and the end of cash. This is Sydney Morning Herald. The article is talking about how that small businesses are switching to cash-only payments into cashless payments in favour of regular bills and notes because their employees can't steal it from the till. Did you get that? They're going, this is great that we go cashless because now we don't have to worry about our employees stealing from us. Like that's the motivation behind going cashless, right? You don't have to trust your employees. So that was 2020. Then COVID hits, right? So now when COVID hits, it says coronavirus could speed up introduction of a cashless society. And basically the gist is that coronavirus, ABC reported, coronavirus fears mean shops are accepting card payments only. Is this the end of cash? Because, as you all remember, we got told by the World Health Organization and our chief health officers that you'll get COVID if you handle cash. So only use your card as a tap and go thing. So this is the trajectory. Now, the cool thing was, if I can say it's cool, that by the time these dates start kicking in, 2020, the new system was in place that the Reserve Bank had announced 2 years before. So it's perfect timing to now handle more cash transactions. So now we go to Sydney Morning Herald. This is an opinion piece. It says, the coronavirus will accelerate the trend towards a cashless society, basically saying the same things. And here we have Euro Money magazine, and it says cashless after COVID. This is in April 2020. And basically the article is saying the same thing. Hey, this is a great opportunity because people have now, like the elderly especially, by the way, you know, the elderly are the people blamed for keeping us cashless, not cashless completely, right? Because you guys don't want to go electronic and all this stuff. But the article is saying is that this is requiring everyone to learn the technology and adapt to technology. So after COVID's finished, we'll all be used to using cashless, no matter how old you are or how young you are. And that's basically the point of the article. Now, Forbes magazine in 2020 comes out and says the digital dollar and the digital wallet, this is America, bill surfaces in the US Senate. What happened was, you know how in Australia we had the stimulus package that they issued out to help people have money? In the US, they did something similar, and they had to put the bill through to the Senate to get voted on to approve to spend the money. Well, in the bill, guess what it says? Well, in the first bill, the draft bill, it said, we'll give the money not as American dollars, but as digital dollars in a digital wallet. So if you want to claim the money from the US government, you need a digital wallet, and then we'll put digital dollars in, and then that's how we get digital currency up. Well, Forbes magazine was leaked a copy of the draft, which is like 30,000 pages, right? And they found it, and so everyone started cracking up about it. All the news medias and things going, how can we get our stimulus in digital dollar? And anyway, they took it out of the draft, and then it went through and passed without that clause. But it came through to the US Senate in the form of a bill. So then, a few weeks later, Forbes goes, well, actually, should our societies go cashless? Maybe it's a good thing. And so they have an article on that, and then we go to Forbes magazine a few weeks later, and it says, forget the coronavirus stimulus bill digital dollar. So all that issue that happened with the Senate, forget that. The digital what? Euro is coming. Now, don't be mistaken. When it talks about digital dollars and digital euros, it's not the same as what you're used to right now with going to your CommBank app or whatever it is and seeing your money as numbers on a screen. We're not talking about the same thing. This is completely different because these are tokens that are owned and held by reserve banks. Right now, where's your money in your app? Where's it sitting, technically? With your commercial bank. So if you bank with Commonwealth, that money's supposed to be with Commonwealth. What we're talking about here is all the money sits with the central bank. In Australia, the Reserve Bank of Australia. In the US, it's the Federal Reserve. So the money stays with them. It doesn't go to your individual banks. And so that means the history of every transaction is with the Reserve Bank of the country, not with your Commonwealth Bank or your NAB or Westpac or whoever else you bank with. So it's a big deal what they're talking about here. Fortune magazine comes out and says why the US shouldn't let China dominate the digital currency race. This is in 2020. China announced in 2020 that they are going to roll out a digital yuan, which is their currency. The idea is it's going to replace the cash in China. They announced that in 2018. In 2022, they were successful. They won the race. They're the first currency on the planet to do it. And right now, the big fear is that other countries are adopting the Chinese currency instead of the US dollar. And so what they're worried about, and I don't think this is going to happen, but they're worried that the whole swing of economic power is going to go from the US to China. That's what they think is going to happen. But if prophecy is correct, I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, let's keep going. Washington Times. The US dollar could be dethroned internationally by digital currency. So this is all happening, by the way, while COVID is happening. So while you're watching Dan Andrews every single day, because I know you all care about Dan Andrews in New South Wales, or you're all watching, what was her name here? That's the one. Or anyway, all of them had their hour of show time every day. While we're watching all of that, behind the scenes, this is what every major mainstream media is publishing. Digital dollar, digital euro, digital yuan. And we're watching around how far we can separate by meters and what mask rule is today and all this stuff. So you can see it seems like there's a bit of a distraction. But despite all of that, this is how the world has been tracking. Sydney Morning Herald, 2022. Says the end of the dollar as we know it. The Reserve Bank of Australia suggests digital tokens, which is digital currency or cashless currency, are on the money. And basically in here it says that the Reserve Bank of Australia, Governor Philip Lowe, has signalled he and his successor may soon be turning what? Digital. So that was in February 2022. When we get to August, the Reserve Bank announces a trial. So last year, they launched a cashless trial here in Australia. So the Sydney Morning Herald, Reserve Bank of Australia to trial a digital currency. And basically, they put a fence around where you can spend the money and who's involved with it, which banks. Basically, the big four were all involved in the trial starting in August last year. And it was to be a collaborative project which ends next month. So for the last 12 months, they've been running this trial here in Australia. At the end of last year, the Reserve Bank put out this statement, and it says, we have concern over the impact of banks after we roll out, this is a central bank digital currency. You should memorize this term because this is everywhere now. Every country is using this expression, CBDC. So in December last year, it says, here's the fear, right? The Reserve Bank came out and said, after running this trial since August, we're in December, we've got a bit of a concern. The Reserve Bank of Australia believes that it will replace the digital currency, will replace the Australian dollar, and ultimately avoiding what? Commercial banks fully. Because if my money is owned and held by the Reserve Bank of Australia, what do I need Commonwealth Bank for? What do I need ANZ for? I don't need any of those banks. Those banks don't need to exist. The Reserve Bank's going, if we do this thing, we won't actually need commercial banks anymore. Surprise, because your money is held by the central agency. This has never happened in the whole of human history, what's happening right before our eyes. This was December last year. So we continue on very quickly. This is news.com.au. 2023 March, just a few months ago. Digital currency tested by Commonwealth Bank of Australia and ANZ as the Reserve Bank of Australia seeks to stave off the threat of cryptocurrency. So initially the fear was that if we go cashless, it's good because then our employees can't steal money from the till. That was the first reason. Next reason was, hey, it's good to go cashless because then you won't get COVID by handling the paper money. And now it's because all those are gone. Now the fear is cryptocurrency is going to destroy our dollar, so we've got to get rid of crypto, the threat of it, by going cashless. So every time you look through the history of this thing, there's always some fear element thrown to us as a public to encourage us to keep going down the path of cashless. So then it goes on, and a couple more here before I finish up. This is Decrypt Magazine. This is a cryptocurrency website, popular one. In February this year, it says, hey, Japan announces the launch of a new central bank digital currency pilot this April. So that was like, 2-3 months ago. So now Japan's involved with it. The US is trialling, Australia is now trialling, Euro is trialling, we're all getting into it. Fortune Crypto Magazine, this is the spin-off from the Fortune magazine. It says, central bank currencies are coming whether we want them or not, right? So that's where we're going, it's inevitable. Our government here said that the turning point has been reached. But then the question is, should you be worried about a central bank digital currency? This is February this year. And basically the outcome is not really clear whether you should be afraid of it or not. But here the federal chairman, this is of the the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, the chairman there says that a United States central bank digital currency would not be what? Anonymous. What does that mean? It means that when I go to the shop, if I have a central bank digital currency and I go to the shop and I buy some flu medicine and I tap on that, they now know that I'm transferring my money from here to the pharmacy for that medicine. So now they know I'm sick. So it's not anonymous. Then if I go to the shop and I buy a whole bunch of vegetables every single day, I never buy meat. Oh, it must be vegetarian. If I'm buying at the same petrol station every single week, oh, so they're living in this radius of the location. So all that information that currently is split out amongst all the banks becomes centralized. And you go, that's a conspiracy theory. No, it's not. That's what China's been doing for the last 3 years with their central bank digital currency. It's exactly what they're doing. And so the Federal Reserve of the US says, yeah, it's not going to be anonymous. It can't be anonymous. The minute you put it into a database, it's no longer anonymous. It's attached to something. So in conclusion, this is what Revelation's alluding to will happen for that last stage of chapter 13 to take place. For that to happen, we need to have that. Check, that's in existence. And we need to have this happen. That's happening right now before our eyes. It's been happening like on steroids since 2018. So it's been 5 years already. And we're at the verge right now. I have another graph which I don't have here. I'll bring it tomorrow. It's a map of the whole world by country. And it has all the countries coloured by what stages they're at with their central bank digital currencies. And all the world right now is either researching it, piloting it, or implemented it. All the world. And they're saying 2025, 2030 will be the time that pretty much 99% of the world is now cashless. Now, I'm not putting that out there as a date for anything to happen. All I'm saying is I am super excited, because what that means, all this means to me, is that what Revelation's been talking about for nearly 2,000 years, we're probably going to see it in our lifetimes. Okay, that was a hallelujah moment. It's pretty exciting. Now, I know I've got to go right now because I've got to get to a meeting at 12:30, but I want to tell you this, and I'll take questions tomorrow in more detail on this, but I just want to say this. Inevitably, some of you are going to come to me and say, what should I do? Because I get this everywhere I go. Do you think I should get gold, get silver? Here's my answer. I don't know. Here's my second answer. I don't care. You ask God what he wants you to do. I don't think there's any benefit in holding gold and silver. That's me personally. Now people say, the next question I get is, so what do you think? If they roll this out, do you take it or not take it? Here's my answer. Probably. Because how else are you going to live? Because it's not going to be the day they introduce it that's the day of the end of the world. Like, how many of you are using barcodes on your cans of baked beans? All of you. It's a part of the way the world's gone, right? This isn't terrifying me of like, I'm going to do everything I can to avoid this. I'm going to go dig a hole and prep out in the bush, and I'm not going to deal with society. I'm going to go off the grid and all that stuff. What for? How's that going to help? Yeah, that's the other thing. Who knows how long the whole thing's going to play out for? But my point's basically this. I'm not afraid of this stuff, even as an IT person who knows where it's going to lead to. I know where this is going to lead to. The fact that you've all been using QR codes and apps and being tracked. Look, if you've got a smartphone, you're trackable right now. So the point is, it's not about having fear of how can I avoid all this stuff. The point is to know that it's all coming together now. That's the point. So what should that now do for me? I'm not running to the bush to go escape it all. I'm going to get more courage to be the ambassador for the kingdom and tell everyone there is wants to listen. Because Jesus is preparing the last stages. Well, let me back it up a little bit. In Revelation 13, the dragon is preparing the last stage of his attack. And if he's doing his last stage, chapter 14, guess what God's going to be doing? His last stage, and that's tomorrow's conversation. So don't come up and ask me, should I go off the grid? Should I not do this? Should I do that? I don't know, and I don't care. You talk to Jesus, he'll guide you. But in the meantime, be an ambassador for Jesus. And all I shared this for you today is to go, yeah, it can actually happen. It could actually all happen. Surprise, surprise. All right, let's have a prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you have gone to the effort to reveal to us the things which must shortly come to pass. And I'm just so grateful that I wasn't born in the year 1023, because that would be really, really a long way away until you were coming back. And so being alive now in 2023, awesome. It looks like all the building blocks from the enemy's perspective are almost complete. So he might be ready to launch his last assault. But I'm going to be super excited to see what you're going to do in chapter 14 tomorrow. Bless my friends here as they go through their day. Give them the confidence that you're in control, that you have told us these things before they happen, so that when we see them, we will be strengthened in our faith. Bless us abundantly, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.